Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, along with Mike Schopp for the Purple Insider Fantasy Schopp. And Mike, we got
Yes.
playoffs, which for many people means, well, my fantasy team is done and so forth, but not for us. I was just drafting a fantasy team for a wild card weekend.
I saw. Yes.
And you were seeing my deep process, which is, I think this guy should be fine. Let's pick him. That's how it kind of went. And I ended up with a bunch of Bills. So I'm going to need them to outperform the Denver defense in Buffalo. So
Don't
we'll go
blame
over
me.
that.
You
Too.
started
Yeah.
that before I showed up.
I didn't ask for help, so we could get the hard critique eventually when we reveal the team that I have. It's not a big squad, it's not a diverse squad, but I like it anyway. But let's begin though with Vikings and Rams, and I've got a bunch of the Underdog Fantasy pick'ems up. The show, obviously, presented by Underdog Fantasy as always, and I've got a bunch of the pick'ems up, and I just want to talk about these. I want to talk about our expectations for Sam Darnold, Matthew Stafford, the star players in this game, because that's where it will be determined. But how much do you make of Sam Darnold's performance against Detroit as having predictive power going into this weekend?
Well, this is a question I would rather hear you answer than me, but I'll go first. And I want to say not a ton. I mean, there are good days and bad days in the league. I want to trust what Darnold has proven this year. I mean, there were times as we got past like Thanksgiving or even Halloween where like, okay, when is the bubble going to burst? And it really didn't. And Detroit, it's so easy to get attached to the most recent narrative, like what happened last week. And Detroit had a few weeks where they couldn't stop people. They had their whole defense on IR. Everybody realized that. Buffalo put up 48. Green Bay was in the 30s. And like, okay, well, the Lions are really not quite the team they were. And they got Anzalone back, who just, I mean, in hockey, once in a while, maybe more in the 80s, you would have somebody with Dino Ciccarelli would slash somebody and like there would be somebody would press charges. And I thought Anzalone had the kind of game on Hawkinson where Hawkinson could have, I don't know, sued him or something like that. It was just so physical. And that happened. So Darnold cracked in that spot, I guess I'd have to say, but that doesn't mean it's over. Now it's LA who he's played. And this is it for me. And this is not the question you asked me. And this is, I'm guessing, not the question you want me to fixate on for our conversation, but it's such an interesting moment right now for them and him as to what happens. If he goes 9 for 30 against the Rams, he's going to free agency, I think. And I don't know, we have many of the same, you might know better, but we might have some of the same conversations about Darnold as ever, like this year didn't happen. But if they win, which they didn't do a couple of years ago when they had that kind of fluky season and the Giants beat them, and like this is the moment for Minnesota. And it's a beatable team. You're a favorite on the road off that loss. This is big. It's even being a favorite means you sort of should do it. And so now we're at this point with Sam Darnold, which like, okay, well, we kind of expect him to bounce back and even win. And that'd be great for him. That might be what the Vikings, in terms of their future, of course, for the present, but are sort of, hoping for. I don't know if that matters. It's just, this is such a big game, and playoffs are always big, but they're bigger for some teams and players and others. This is like a career defining or a career making, maybe better put, opportunity for him.
Yeah. And that's something that I've been trying to figure out how much I want to like put that on the headline. Do I need the big movie voice guy to say Sam Darnold, his career was at a crossroads, or is this more of the decision has probably been made? And if he has a tough game, well, he's got 16 or 15 other games that he played this year that put them in this position that you have to weigh heavier than one performance. But if it is back to back and it's brutal performances and it's a complete collapse, I know this: NFL people are just as reactionary as you and I and everybody at home on their couch. They are not immune to overreacting to football, just the same way that the Vikings brought back Kirk Cousins in 2019, brought him back for 2020, and kept Mike Zimmer because they won a playoff game in New Orleans. And they decided that that was proof that Kirk could win in the playoffs and so forth. I remember them talking about that at the combine. Well, he showed us in that game that he get like, what? The
In an
guy's been
overtime
around.
game too.
Right.
Like, it's so fickle.
And they won the coin flip. And if Drew Brees wins the coin flip, maybe he scores, and so whatever. But that is how a lot of football is decided in this world. I would have a tough time seeing Sam Darnold having a performance that badly, because a lot of times in the NFL, when you play your absolute worst, everybody goes to work with a different type of approach the next week. They fix the things that's why they're the best at what they do, is that they're good at fixing stuff. And this from the gambling world. If a team has just kind of been down bad in a game that they weren't supposed to be, pretty good idea to bet on them for the next week. If they have a good coaching staff, they're going to bounce back for that next week. And I think that with Sam Darnold, he played really well against the Rams defense the last time. It was the Vikings defense that actually let them down. And he's been good at bouncing back. He throws an interception. Well, he's going to lead a touchdown drive the next time down. And the other thing I can't help but think is, when I watched the game back and I watched it through the coach's tape and all that, there were several plays where you said, hey, Sam Darnold, you got to make that throw, man. That guy's open. That's a big gain. That's whatever. There were also a lot of plays that were either kind of random, or Jefferson drops a touchdown, which never happens, or the left guard gets beat instantly, or, a number of different things that on a week-to-week basis just don't happen all together all at once, that happened in that Lions game. And I'm not going to throw out the Green Bay game from the week before, or the game in Seattle, or the game against Atlanta, or the, et cetera, all through the second half of the season, where he won 9 games in a row. And now we're like, is this guy even good? I mean, it just seems like such classic overreaction football stuff. And at the same time, if it is a 9 for 30, if it's a total melt and they lose by 30 points, I think they will walk out of Los Angeles and say, you know what, we just need a lot more, and we're going to have to do something different here. That's probably true.
Yeah, again, I defer to you. I mean, I don't know if the question is, in terms of the Vikings' decision, ultimately, if there is one that's close, is he good? Their bet is more complicated than that. I mean, the existence of McCarthy, if he weren't there, it'd be easy. Like, teams it'd be easy. It wouldn't be interesting to talk about. He'd be back. But the investment in McCarthy makes you wonder, and you and everybody else were sort of like, this guy is really promising. He looks good. The preseason where he got hurt. So that makes it different. Rookie deal, everything like that. This is our window. Jefferson is signed. You have all these different facets of that. If Darnold has the same game, not that he had in Detroit, but that he had in LA back in October, what's that? So that was 18 for 25, 240 and 3 sacks, no picks. They are in the game until the end. There's the face mask in the end zone that doesn't get called. I mean, it was a back and forth game. The Vikings were up, but it was the Rams mostly in the lead in the second half. If that happens again, if the Rams score 30 points on Flores and Darnold is, pretty good, but they lose, the quarterback narrative stuff, I mean, we're just scratching the surface. It gets way stupider than what we've said already. Like, you really have to win here. And a 10-9 win might do more for Darnold than a 30-27 loss or something like that. And I don't know. That's not right. If he has a 300-yard game, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception late that seals it for LA, you're going to be talking about the interception all off season. So I don't know. I mean, these are all questions I would ask you about what you think they'll do. They can definitely win here. I mean, the Rams are one of, I think, the 3 weakest teams in the playoffs. I think it's the Steelers, the Texans, and the Rams. And interestingly, the Texans and the Rams are home in the first round. So that's nice for them. but not strong divisions. I think Miami went to LA mid to late season, Monday Night Football, and kind of won easily. So the Rams are scary because of McVay. They're healthy at this point. They brazenly took last week off, basically. McVay didn't even call the plays in that game. I mean, they just sort of like, we don't care. And I didn't mind that for them because they had beaten Minnesota, and they went to overtime with Detroit in week 1, and they played a strong playoff game against Detroit last year. They decided it was worth it for them to sort of give away the Seattle game, which they almost won anyway with Garoppolo. If you get it, you get it, and you're playing Washington. But this way, you're playing teams you're very familiar with. You've had success against. You're a Super Bowl winning coach. Like, it's the closest spread of the weekend, and I think that kind of makes it the most interesting wild card game.
Folks, it's a wonderful time of year in football, and there's a perfect dad hack that I want to tell you about that will get your kid to love Minnesota football the way that you do. It is called Future Fan Sports. At Christmas time, I gave this to one of my friends, and it worked like a charm. Future Fans helps little kids become big football fans by embedding the rules of football into parallel games and activities that make it very easy for a kid to understand. You get a box full of different games and a playbook that guides you along. For example, instead of trying to explain downs, they have a beanbag toss game with things like 4 tries or 6 points for a touchdown. All those things connect through a storybook that guides the entire future fan experience. The playbook also has lots of different mini games like word searches and bingo, where you check off all the different things that happen in a football game. It's only $49.99 at futurefans.com, and you can use the code PURPLE to get 10% off. That's futurefans.com, code PURPLE, and unlock a lifetime of memories together. I think McVay was smart to do this. I don't think that the gap between the Vikings and a team like Washington is enormous.
Yeah.
I was just talking earlier this morning to our buddy Aaron Schatz about what his analytics say. And, I think that his point is reasonable when he says that the Vikings, everything on paper says you're a Super Bowl contender, but they don't quite say that you're Peyton Manning's 14-win team, right? That you are one of the all-time great 14-win teams. You're more of just a good team that maybe probably should have won 11 or 12 instead of 14 this year. And if you look at the Rams and the injuries that they had early in the season, especially Puka Nacua, once they got him back, they went 7-2 in games that they cared about after they got Puka Nacua back. He is a massive part of their offense. They have a defensive line that could cause a ton of havoc for the Vikings and for Sam Darnold. I think it is a very even matchup when you consider that the Vikings just had to play that physical game in Detroit, where Detroit just beat them up. Like the whole game, they just beat them up. That was a back alley fight for them that the Vikings were not ready for. And so they're coming in beat up. The Rams have been chilling at the beach. And now, this is two teams in different spots here going into this game, which I think matters. But just to circle back to your Darnold point, the answer is that I don't know, and they might not know exactly what they're going to do still. I think that what they have is probably paths. So if you're bringing back Darnold, you're going to do it in a certain way, which may be the franchise tag. It may be a short-term contract. They also know how J.J. McCarthy's knee is. They also are probably aware that J.J. McCarthy has thrown about 400 passes since hitting puberty in football, and none of them have been in the NFL, which is a lot to ask for somebody to come in. But to your point, if the offensive line gets crushed and the defense and the corners get destroyed, and they lose 35-21, they'll probably walk out and go, this roster just isn't good enough to win a Super Bowl. And so we need corners, we need guards, we need everything around the quarterback. And how are we going to do it? Which, I think a lot of people think that's impossible to do. It's not. But still, like, it is more tricky to do, to go into free agency and rebuild all of those things, because they don't have a lot of recent draft picks to lean on. So there's a lot of moving parts to it. And I think that the decision is probably largely made at this point, but it can be influenced, I think, by the way that this ends up playing out.
We almost already do talk endlessly about like the sort of the the randomness and the variables that shape these things. Like if Detroit, they're in the toughest division ever this year. I mean, an 11-win team finished third. So if you don't have that, you're one game away from, or just one Detroit slip up away from the 1 seed and a bye, and nobody's even asking these questions about Darnold yet. It's more just like what an accomplishment. But that didn't happen. In the AFC, Kansas City, recognizing that the 3 Super Bowl wins already and what that represents, but Kansas City was really never the best looking team this year at all. They go to 15-1, lay down in Denver, 15-2. That's incredible. And they get that bye. And what's that worth? If, they're going to play Houston or the Chargers in the first, I kind of like the Chargers in that matchup if it's that, but still, like, what an advantage. And the way it's set up right now, the NFL went to the 7th playoff team that nobody wanted. Like nobody was ever clamoring for that. It was just more like, we're going to go more. We're adding week 18. We're adding a 7th playoff team. Nobody wanted that. The advantage of that bye is massive. And you've got in the Chiefs a team that really didn't look as good as the Ravens this year or even the Bills, but they got it. And that really tilts things in their favor, or at least evens it. The Lions really were that team all year and had beaten Minnesota earlier on the road in a close game. They get there now, and they look like they're back as the team to beat, I think, with the coupling of who they are and that advantage that they earned by winning Sunday.
Just to touch on your point about the randomness and the small sample sizes that football is shaped on, I was thinking of just some examples, but how about the Packers with Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love? And remember in that season what was it, 2022, where the Packers are struggling kind of the whole year and they need that one win against Detroit to get into the playoffs. But there's a world where Detroit fails on a 4th down there, and the Packers get the ball back. Rodgers leads them to a tremendous victory, goes into the playoffs, wins a playoff game or two. And they say, we can't really go to Jordan Love now because we're still in our winning window with Aaron Rodgers. There's like 10,000 of these through NFL history. I mean, even, poor Alex Smith here. Marcus Mariota throws a touchdown to himself. I think that they were going to Mahomes no matter what. But, if Alex Smith wins that game and they win another one the next week, like, are they going to Mahomes? Like, there's just so many of these throughout history. The Bills did, after making the playoffs, draft Josh Allen and decide to go in that direction. But I don't think Tyrod Taylor ever played at the level of Sam Darnold. But there's just a lot of butterfly effects that could or might not take place depending on the way that they're approaching this. If they are concerned about throwing in a quarterback with no experience next year with expectations of playing the NFC North, they might just be thinking we have to keep Sam Darnold and develop McCarthy because he had a lost year for this year, which factors in as well.
It's at the same time the most maddening and beautiful thing about the NFL. I just like every year has some of these. You're right. Thousands is right. Like every year has some of these. In Buffalo for the last 25 years, everybody wants to tell you that if not for the Music City Miracle, which was an actual play that didn't have to count, but it was close. If not for that the Bills were going to the Super Bowl just like Tennessee did because the rest of the conference was so weak. That's a makeable argument, but it didn't happen. So who wants to listen to anybody sort of saying that? Like every Minnesota and Buffalo alike have these kinds of things over the years, or like, make a field goal, right? Gary Anderson, Scott Norwood, make a field goal. Who knows then? I mean, in Buffalo's case, we know because that would have been it. But still, that the Vikings Denver game too soon. That's the game we all wanted. Anyway, that's what it is. And you have to be able to overcome that. Much easier said than done. Darnold has a chance to do that. So does Baker Mayfield. I mean, very similarly, guys who went through Carolina and were just kind of punching bags at that point. Here they are in spots where they're playing. I mean, Mayfield's favored too in his game against Washington. He's had a phenomenal season. He's already gotten the contract, but in terms of rewriting your history, your career, your legacy, all that stuff. It's all happening right now.
It happens in Roger Goodell's NFL playoffs. So let's talk about this football game here with the Rams and the Vikings. Sam Darnold's higher and lower number on Underdog Fantasy, which promo code PURPLE, if you haven't already, to play along with us, is 268.5 yards, 1.5 touchdowns. And I just, we probably screwed up saying, hey, hit those hires on the Detroit game. And it didn't turn out to be that way with the way he played and the offense played. But this just feels like if you're going to beat the Rams in this game, they're probably going to score some points. They're probably going to move the ball, that Sam Darnold will have to go higher on these numbers, especially 1.5 touchdowns. That's the one I think. They can't run in the red zone. They refuse to run in the red zone, but even when they do, it looks terrible. Clearly, there's volatility to trying to throw it in every single time, but that's just what they have to do. So if he ends up with less than 1.5 touchdowns, you end up with no playoff win and your season is over. That's how I look at this. So I would bang the higher on this one just because they're not scoring touchdowns in any other way.
Okay. Dance with who brung you, right? Isn't that the expression? I mean, this is it for him. This is it for O'Connell for this year. You got to just go for it. And that's what Minnesota's brand is. So I like that philosophy, that kind of thinking. He threw 2 touchdown passes in the first meeting to Oliver and Sherfield, I believe, both in the first quarter of that game. I wonder how you like the receiver corner kind of matchups in this game, because Poop owned them. That was when he wasn't supposed to play, and he was amazing in that game. Assume healthy now, like, should that happen again? Not to jump ahead, but Jefferson in the same way, man, so close so many times in Detroit. And you could just see the frustration on Jefferson's face all night about how it was just like this far away always. It's reasonable, maybe even right, to think that goes the other way this week against a softer matchup, because it's always been Minnesota's job one to feed him. So if he goes for 150 or some sort of Justin Jefferson game that we're all kind of almost counting on, then you get there with Darnold's numbers.
The Rams do not have a great secondary, and I do think that Jefferson has, even for himself, some redemption. It's all focused on Sam Darnold. Jefferson is so unbelievably good at football that when he has a horrendous game on the biggest stage, we're like, well, but he deserves criticism for that game. I mean, he dropped a touchdown that could have changed the game. Darnold on that play actually makes an awesome throw right to the back of the end zone, back end line. It's there. I mean, leave your feet for 9 inches and catch the ball, and he just doesn't. And then there's another third down that is a game changer that he drops as well, that he never, ever drops. And so he gets the benefit of the doubt, but I think he got overly amped up for that game. I think that the crowd got to everybody on that team and they freaked out a little bit. And it wasn't just him, it was all of them. If anything, now you've seen that. Now you've felt a playoff atmosphere. For a lot of you, you haven't spent a lot of time here in your careers. Jefferson has no road playoff games in his career, so this will be a first, but at least they got a little of that experience. I think that will help them, and the fact that the Rams just don't have great secondary players will help them a lot. Now, how about Stafford? What do you think of Matthew Stafford's season? Because if you drafted him in fantasy, you'd be like, oh, that was kind of disappointing. I think that the actual watching of it, though, he played pretty well.
Yeah, me too. I don't want to say they paced themselves this year, because they were never the favorite. They stole a couple of wins. The game against San Francisco, I remember early in the season. The Buffalo game was a shootout back and forth, and they won enough of those games to have clinched the division before week 18. So it's sort of easy, I think, Stafford, where I'm at anyway, is like right in line, which is they've won a championship. You have to be respectful, if not afraid. Like the Rams have earned a certain respect here with what's happened over the last 3-4 years. And I don't see anything with the Rams lately or at all this year that tells me that he's different or that they're different. Like they've had those games. The Minnesota game was one, the Buffalo game was one. Those are the games we watched. And I think Stafford is probably still Stafford. So yeah, I mean, depends on what kind of game script you want to write here. I like your point you just made. I was gonna say it too. The fact that the Vikings had Detroit, I think, should maybe calm them down for LA. The crowd it's probably a Vikings crowd. Playoffs can be different. Those regular season games, everybody plans ahead and buys tickets and flights 6 months ahead. But still, like, the Rams do not really have a home stadium. Also, there are terrible scenes in LA. I know you've got family connections there. I don't know just what that's going to mean in the next few days, but devastating fires and just really awful scenes from that part of the country. We'll talk, assuming that the game goes on as it was scheduled to on Monday night. So I think, Stafford is probably still the same guy we're used to, which makes it a challenge.
It does. His higher lower number here is 238.5, which if they do that, if he goes lower than that, he either had a really, really bad night or they won, which is a weird dynamic.
Yeah.
But I think that that's true, right? If they get ahead in the game and they're playing defense and he's playing smart with the football and throwing underneath passes and completions and long drives, which we know he can do, I don't know that anybody I've ever seen, maybe Randall Cunningham would be an example of this, but has altered his game as he's gone along from just wild, out of control gunslinger. Maybe, I don't know, maybe John Elway had to do this at the end, to this guy plays some sharp, smart quarterback. And it's just really impressive. So I think that he's going to want to do a lot of underneath stuff, a lot of long drives, not too much risk taking, and see if they can hang on to the football all night, which makes me want to go lower on this number. But I also think it's a really good number for if he's in this range, they're probably having a good game.
Yeah, that's it. Lower is always brave, right? Like, because the numbers are pumped up pretty good, and there's always an argument for it, but it's a little bit more, takes a little bit more courage to go lowers, to go unders in the prop world. I know the Kyren Williams is somewhere in the 80s for his rushing number here, and that's also a pretty positive game script. They lost Blake Corum, the rookie out of Michigan, to a broken arm last week. He would have been the complement to Kyren, but McVay doesn't do a lot of that anyway. So I guess I sooner see a high scoring game. The total is going to be what, high 40s? 47 and a half. I sooner like the higher, the over when it comes to that indoors, with what we've already talked about with Minnesota, the Rams being healthy, taking last week off. That's kind of where I'm at. I know last week happened, and that didn't happen for Minnesota, for the two, except for Gibbs. Like that didn't happen last week, but I do kind of like the idea of a back and forth game here.
I think so too. Kyren Williams, 84.5 is his number. And that's another one. There's another way to look at this, is just a fun, if this guy does this, if he hits the higher number, what happens, or the lower number. And for Kyren Williams, if he is lower than that, that means it's gone well for the Vikings and their top rushing defense has held strong, which it did not against Detroit for the entire game. It did enough to make things interesting, but not as the floodgates broke. But Kyren Williams, I think, is very valuable to them for staying on the field, which, if there's one way to beat the Vikings, I think it's to wear down their defense. They've done it all year. They've got an older group that's played a ton of snaps. They've been healthy, which also means that they haven't had, oh, this guy had, a broken hand and missed 3 weeks or something, and his body's a little bit more fresh. They don't have that. Like, all their guys have been on the field all year long. And I think if you're grinding away at them throughout this game with Kyren Williams, that could be a good strategy for the Rams.
It could, but I don't love the player. I mean, I in terms of fantasy, the you get paid off because he just gets the ball constantly. Like, his 84 yards, if that's the number, will come on 25 carries. Something like that, which, again, like, you don't want to hear that the Rams RB1 had 25 carries in this game for trying to predict the outcome of the game. But I he had the extra day here too, which helps. I doubt the Vikings get gashed. He doesn't really break anything. I like both teams to throw the ball, with some success or at least with some intent in this game. Whether the Rams would be the team of the two where I would think they'd sooner have more trouble because they're just not as good. So I don't love Kyren over, but he gets so much volume. This was the debate about him last 2 years in the offseason in terms of his draft value is, well, the efficiency isn't really there, but McVay loves his RB1, and if he stays healthy, look at the snap share. It's been massive, that's how, an example of how these numbers are built well. Like they know what they're doing. 84.5. They know what they're doing.
Okay. One more just from this game with star players. If you were to be forced to pick a higher number on Puka Nacua at 90.5 or on Justin Jefferson at 88.5, which might as well just be the same exact number,
Yeah.
which one of those players would you prefer?
I'd have to say Jefferson, but not with like so much conviction because I could see Puka having another big game here too. Like Cooper Kupp has really tailed off. And that's good and bad for this because it means more Puka, but it also means the Rams are kind of limited. If Kupp isn't right, I don't know. I wouldn't want to necessarily bet against him, but the fewer options you have, that's what makes Minnesota such a treat in terms of fantasy this year with Addison and Hawkinson and Aaron Jones out of the backfield. There's a Naylor. It was Demarcus Robinson, I think, who caught 2 touchdown passes in the win over Minnesota back in October. But yeah, I think I'd like higher on both guys, actually.
I do too. Nacua has to be their passing game, though, it seems a little bit more than Jefferson has to be the Vikings passing game because you could see Addison or Hawkinson. I think it's just 1 week really does something to you, the NFL, when it doesn't go well, because going into the game, I looked at Hawkinson and his like what was his numbers if it was projected out to 17 weeks, and it was something like 900 yards
Yeah.
going into last week. And I thought, well, that seems about right for where he would have been this year. And
Yeah.
then last week, I think Darnold goes 2 for 8 targeting him. And then you go and wait, do they have a problem that they can't find? Like, this is what the football does to you. But it hasn't quite been the same as it was where Cousins would just work the ball to Hawkinson constantly. There's a little bit of a different chemistry between Hawkinson and Darnold. And I think a little bit less on the I'm going to go underneath and check down to the tight end than there was with Kirk Cousins. So that's
Well,
an interesting one as well.
I love the 8 targets, though. And Anzalone, again, was all over him. That's not happening here. I mean, is his number going to be in the 40s? I like
Yes.
higher on
Yeah.
Hawkinson.
Yeah. His number is 39.5. So yeah,
Oh,
that
let's go.
seems very possible. I gotta say, just my mistake on not factoring how much Anzalone would make a difference to that game. That's
Yeah.
leading up to it. I was like, well, it's just one guy coming back, but their defense is still banged up. Also, I forgot, and I shouldn't have, that when Zadarius Smith needs to be great, Zadarius Smith is great. He was for the Vikings, he was for the Packers, and he'll kind of chill out for some weeks and then just go crazy. He did that against the Vikings.
You know who was great this year, too, is Jared Verse.
Yes. Yep. Probably a top 5 to 7 player at that position, which, who was not great last week against Zadarius Smith was Cam Robinson. And that matchup there could be a major determining factor on where this thing goes.
Yeah, you better hope not. That's what did you say, or what did we talk about when the Vikings got Robinson after the Darisaw injury? It was like good against the run, but I don't know. Has that been what you've seen? Because they might be vulnerable there.
It's the opposite. He's a decent pass protector, but really terrible in the run blocking in comparison to his peers. Much better than me at it, but not one of the better run blockers in the league. And the pass protection is a strength, and that's been a high grade for him from PFF for his whole career. But there is a factor with him that he wasn't on the team all year. And what you see happening, and their left guard has some problems with this too, is teams are running games at those guys. So they're running, defensive tackles to the outside, defensive ends inside, and there's confusion there. And they're running some different pressures that try to get those guys on islands. So the Vikings can't really help them with Josh Oliver or with a running back. And he's not Christian Darrisaw. He's human. It's like when the Vikings had Riley Reef out there. Like, he's a guy. He could play in the league, but this is not your $30 million a year type of tackle that you just set it and forget it. I mean, they have to pay some attention over there. And that's where Oliver could be a bigger factor in this game. Over on that side, I think that he's going to need to do a lot of help. I want to just get your opinion on one other game in the weekend, and I want you to pick the game. What is the most intriguing, fascinating, breathtaking, spellbinding game of the weekend that is not Vikings and Rams?
They're all so interesting. In Buffalo, of course, we're talking about the Bills Broncos, but I'd admit that we're talking more about the Ravens this week so far than the Broncos, which, that might not be a great sign. I think I'll go with the Baltimore game because I am not as confident as people I hear and read that the Steelers will just have been so bad that they can't hang in this game. I accept it looks right to me too that Baltimore has arguably been the most efficient team in the NFL. The 6.8 yards per play is crazy this year. And now, after half a season of their defense is bad, you've got Orlovsky on Saturday in the game against Cleveland saying it's the best in the league right now with the changes they've made to the secondary, which, if correct, makes Baltimore probably at least the team to beat in the AFC. But they have the Pittsburgh Steelers of all teams. They have to convince themselves. Lamar Jackson has to convince himself on Saturday night that that's actually the Bears out there or some NFC team that he always beats. I think Jackson, who I love as a player in the playoffs or even in regular season games against Pittsburgh, like the bigger spots, gets tight. And I wouldn't want to play Pittsburgh first if I were he. I just feel like that's a little bit of a trap. It's possible that Pittsburgh is so down bad that they just cannot hang anymore. It'll look like the regular season game that they just played around Christmas. But Jackson fumbled on the first drive in that game. The Steelers punted and the Ravens punt returner fumbled on that play. There was a third Ravens fumble. They just recovered them all. And they also got a Russell Wilson fumble in near the end zone. And I don't know, these kinds of things come up. They're pretty fluky. So Baltimore needs to be right. What other people have said this too, but last year, that AFC Championship game, I'm sure I brought this up to you as we've been together for so many weeks. They get the opening kickoff. They're the 1 seed. They're the boss. First play, 2-yard run. Second play, Jackson gets out to the right and looks behind him and slides. All right, I'm worried now. And they scored 10 points. So that can happen to the Ravens. The Ravens and the Bills are so parallel with sort of what they have in front of them here. They should meet in the divisional round, which would be an incredible matchup there for the right to go to Kansas City if that's how it plays out. But I'm just not confident that the Ravens will be on it. And they're not going to have Zay Flowers, which is no small thing. So, again, maybe Pittsburgh is just shot. This is what's happened last year. It happened in 2021 when they've been the worst team in the playoffs 3 of the last 4 years, and they've looked it. And if that's the case, then, Pickens is just sort of running in circles and mad everybody. But I would be really impressed if Baltimore gets to 30 points in that game, because I think they're just they have to show me anyway that they can get out of their own heads. And that can happen through Derrick Henry. He could save everybody, but he's 31. That's just, we're talking about 4 games at this point forward to reach the goal. Really interesting psychological matchup for me.
Yeah, and I think it's the way you approach that is a game that we all have just gone, okay, well, Baltimore wins, and then let's talk about other games. And you're like, well, let's hold on because every one of these wild card weekends has some result that we're pretty shocked by. I was there in New Orleans when the Vikings beat the Saints when they were supposed to be a team that goes to the Super Bowl, and the Vikings shock them in New Orleans. There's always one every year where we just can't believe what result we're walking out of. And if Baltimore's season, I mean, you talk about the the debate shows the next day.
Oh,
If
no.
Baltimore's season ended in Pittsburgh, oh my gosh. I was watching a game from '03 the other day with the Colts and the Broncos, and Peyton Manning hadn't yet won a playoff game. And the whole intro, they did this big Peyton Manning has had his playoff meltdowns, and they show Vanderjet kicking it off into the stands in the against Miami, and there's this whole can he actually win a playoff game? And then they win 41 to
Huge.
3. Yeah, just
Yeah.
destroy Denver in the game. But it would be far from the first all-time great quarterback to have that follow him around. Dan Marino was certainly that way, and even John Elway, and until he got it done. It was always the can Elway really win the big one.
Well,
So
it's his 7th year now, and Allen too. Allen he hasn't had the particular individual failures in the playoffs, but they're still like they've made the third round once after winning the division 5 years in a row. So it's kind of the same thing. If Baltimore does play its best, they'll win maybe easily, and that could rev them up for the rest of it. There was a look ahead line, if it is Baltimore at Buffalo, that the Ravens would be favored here. Think of the Bills season that they just had, but for that to be true says a lot. The odds makers and the pundits, if you will, Matthew, have always been pro Ravens. Like the Ravens have been like the darlings of that world, and the Eagles for like the past 5-6 years. So what game am I most curious about? I mean, I like them all, but I'm curious to see on Saturday night if the Ravens look like they should.
I was going to go Green Bay and Philadelphia. I'm not a medical health expert, but Jalen Hurts coming off of a concussion. They do not have the best passing game, which usually is what drives the success. And they also teeter on about to fall apart. When you have to create a specific dance after a touchdown to show the world we're best friends, something's not right there. And weirdly, as good as they've been, it hasn't been. It's odd to say, right? They're a great team, right? But there have been all these kind of moments with them where you go, is it quite as good as I think it is, or as the world thinks it is? And also Green Bay, another fascinating subject is they lose against the Vikings and then they go to Chicago and they blow that game and they're playing Malik Willis or whatever. So throw that one out. But before that, the Packers had made this argument that they were a top 3 team in the NFC, and our, DVOA type statistics had put them all the way toward the top of the league with the way that they had played. They played within 3 points of Detroit, probably could have won that game. And they're going there to Philly, where Philly, I'm just not sure where they are at this moment at the quarterback position. That one also has a big effect potentially on the Vikings and
Oh
what
yeah.
they end up doing for next week. But that's the one I'm most intrigued by, because I think everyone is written in Philadelphia. Well, Christian Watson's out. They're not going to be able to do it. But I think Green Bay with their team is a little bit built to handle Philadelphia.
Yeah. I don't disagree. That's a game where we talked about Minnesota and LA in the context of the underdog pick'ems. And we talked about a lot of hires, so that's where I ended up, and you in a couple cases too. That's one where I would be the opposite. I could see Philadelphia wanting to lean into Barkley, and Green Bay's defense is good, and that doesn't really work out. And then Philadelphia's roster is so great. I mean, they just have so many good players that Love, sometimes gets in his own way, maybe too as good as he can be. And I'm 13 all in the fourth. Like that's the kind of game I see there.
Yeah. This weekend is fantastic.
It
And
is. It's the best.
I will thank the National Football League for putting the Vikings on Monday so I can watch the games. That'll be great. Let me, before we wrap here, Mike, let me show you the draft that I did when we were just getting logged on here. So this was, let me now go to here. Yep. Okay. So here is the full look at the draft.
So this
And
is not a tournament. Again, this is a self-contained 16 league, right? I mean, this is
the
what is
Wildcat.
the
Yes.
Wildcat, like
Yes.
$3.
Yep.
Yeah, you're just trying to beat these other five blokes.
Yes, exactly. For the highest of high stakes. Anyway, so this is on Underdog Fantasy, obviously, which is the presenter of this here show and the best place to play fantasy sports, and the tremendous app that is very easy to use. So if you want to play along with any of our pick'ems or jump into a quick fantasy league for the weekend, this is how easy it is to do that. I did it. And you could sign up using the code PURPLE, get your special pick, first time deposit offer up to $1,000 bonus cash. Must be 18 or older. Terms apply. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. So what do we think of my here draft, Mike? I decided to go all in on Bills players. So I took Josh Allen I had the second overall pick. Then I decided to go at wide receiver with Ladd McConkey because I just don't see who else the ball is going to. I know Quentin Johnston had 13 catches or whatever last week, which if you had week 18 in your fantasy
Oof.
leagues and stuck with that guy, then congratulations. He made a one-handed catch down the sideline. Just unbelievable explosion from him. But Ladd McConkey is the guy that they're going to throw to. Give me some breakdown on what I did here.
I do like the Chargers to win one game, and if I were the Chiefs, they would be the team I would not want to face. Not that if you're the Chiefs, you would be necessarily afraid of anybody. But you started with Allen before I jumped on. I think again, this is not a format I play in, but I think in these, I would probably wait on quarterback. It's just that Allen can be such a beast that, you're as soon as you make your first pick, you're kind of setting the table for the whole thing, which, as you said, ended up meaning, is it maybe two? I see two other Bills. Who was your last pick?
Dalton Kincaid is the one
Okay,
that's
so
not
yeah, you're
showing.
looking for. We talked about it. Like, I would have liked a little Denver there, but you really couldn't get it. Like, Sutton went, and then Mims also went. I like Mims for that, because to get the points you might need from the Bills, you probably need Denver to push them a little bit. And so somebody there would have been nice for this team. I like McConkey too. I think the Chargers are a little bit dangerous, and Devontae Smith seems like good value in the fourth round. I'm playing in. I've had a couple dozen drafts in the gauntlet and the mitten and the tournament stuff where they're just like we talked about in August in the different formats at Underdog. You're playing against thousands of other teams, literally. Like you have to. This is a 1 week league you're in. This is only the wild card weekend. In the tournaments, it's the whole playoffs. So you're trying to at the same time build teams that can win a week, but also have a chance if you make the Super Bowl week. And that's, that's hard because of the bye week and trying to, what do you want to do? They always tell you to sort of predict the brackets backwards. Who do you think the Super Bowl teams are? And then just like with the NCAA tournament, try to figure it out from there. So that's a really interesting challenge. Underdog, there's just so many. I looked this morning and there are double digits, different price points and formats this week, Saturday only, Sunday only, and then the tournament ones that are super popular and fill up really fast. So there's a lot to enjoy over there.
That sounds like you should use the promo code PURPLE. Everybody, because that
Every
also
week we talk about this. I wish I could deactivate my account and sign up again new as promo code PURPLE, but it's a one-time thing.
Well, what someone should do then is do it for you, because you've provided such great commentary throughout the season, and we will continue to do that throughout the playoffs. And but I got to ask you to put it on record here. Who do you think is in the Super Bowl?
Oh, wow.
I love
Well,
that you responded like you had never thought of it. Like,
no, I don't like these questions because
all
I
right,
don't feel like it's
Super Bowl.
what are my chances of getting it right?
Well, whatever.
Whatever. I I think Kansas City, because the advantage of turns into 3 weeks off between important games, and there's a pretty good chance they'll play a team in the second round that they're much better than, which means like it's the AFC Championship away against a Buffalo or a Baltimore at home. And I think that's, unfortunately for my guys here in Bills country, not a bad bet, straight up. So I would say them. And I want the NFC to be more unpredictable, but what Detroit just did, and then getting the week off and maybe getting Montgomery back, it's boring, but I'll pick I do think Detroit would be the better team in that game.
I I think the Bills, which is a hard pick to make considering how many times they have come short against the Kansas City Chiefs. But
One of us should take them.
this feels like this is it. The NFC, I don't know. If you told me the Rams made the Super Bowl, I'd be like, okay, well, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Almost any team here, you could see it. But Philadelphia or Detroit is the two most obvious picks. They make the most sense. But I don't know. I guess Buffalo, Detroit for who gets to have a Super Bowl for tortured franchises that struggled for so long makes a lot of sense to me. And who am I to not pick Detroit after going there and watching them play the way that they did?
The Bills thing is that they were first in the league in fewest turnovers and third in takeaways. They were plus 24. They have not lost a fumble since week 4. So if they can keep that up, they should go far. They could go far. If they can't, because like the defense is getting scored on, and it's not all random. Like Allen and Cook, for as many games and touches and plays and hits to hold on to the ball. It's not like they're fumbling 3 times a week and just recovering them all either. But they have lost 2 fumbles this year. They've got to. Ross Tucker warned me yesterday because I made this point to him. He's like, if they fumbled 3 times against the Lions, it's on you. And I said, well, okay, then fumbling is luck, but talking about it isn't. Great. I know how this works now. I appreciate that from him. That's a thing to watch with Buffalo because they've been fully on the plus side in those areas this year. And that's not easily controllable.
Cannot wait for this weekend of football. Mike, great stuff. Once again, as always, ADP Chasing, the Deep End Fantasy Football Show, and of course, WGR in Buffalo. So thanks. And the next time we talk, we'll see if there's still Vikings games to talk about.
Good luck, everybody. Good luck. Let's go. See ya.